Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. I have a paragraph to read it to you. So this webinar is jointly hosted by the 21st Century China Center at UCSD and the Asian Pacific Center at UCLA. My name is Ruixue Jia. I'm Associate Professor of Economics at UCSD GPS. And thank you for joining our discussion today. This seminar will be recorded and will be available on video, which can be accessed on our website, china.ucsd.edu. Please use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. I'll be reading the questions you submit for our speaker during the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. So today, we are delighted to have Professor Gan Li to join us. He's a professor of economics at Texas A&M University and also the director of the famous and important China Household Finance Survey at Southwestern University of Finance and Economics in Chengdu. So Professor Gan, please unmute yourself and take it away. Thank you.
All right, let me try. Can you see the screen?
No.
No? Okay, let me try to, okay. Let me just, okay. Now can you see the screen?
Just a second, I see you started. Great, yeah. Now
okay.
we can
so please also turn on your video, Professor Gan.
Turn on my video. Okay, all right. Just 1 second. Did I turn on? Okay, is okay now?
Wonderful, great.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I'm very happy here to share some of the research after the COVID-19 with colleagues at the Southwestern University of Finance Economics, a China Household Finance Survey. Today we actually have collected quite a bit of the data since the COVID-19. Most importantly, we use our China Household Finance Survey, which we have done 5 waves. There are 40,000 nationally and provincially representative sample. And we went back to them twice, one in late February and March, and another time in May. And basically, each time about 5,000 households. We know quite a bit about them, so we get update of what's going on. We also work with Ant Financial and also Alibaba, conduct quite some of the surveys with Alipay users, and also some small business on the Alibaba platform. Some of the data will be based on that too. So let me begin with an outline of the Chinese domestic consumption. So far, the data available from National Bureau of Statistics. You can see from left, this is the first 5 months. We know the data. This is a growth rate of total retail sales published by National Bureau of Statistics compared with last year, same month. You can see that, roughly speaking, yes, consumption has recovered quite a bit. In May, it's only 2.8% less than last May. So I did a little bit scenario. You can see that if we maintain the negative 2.8%, the national year round, you get 7%. If from June, we have same as last year, the total, the year-round consumption will be minus 5.5. And if you want to be reach to the same, no growth, 0 growth rate for the total consumption, for the total retail sales, will be 9%. You have to have a 9% monthly growth rate from June. But the data, are we going to get 9%? I doubt it. Or what's going to happen? So the second data, the right panel is the holiday, the tourist revenues and the number of tourists in May 1st holiday, and in the just last, Dragon Boat Festival holiday, just a couple of days ago. You can see that actually, relatively speaking, that the Dragon Boat Festival holiday, you can have fewer consumptions than even than May 1st. So things seems like not getting better, but getting a little bit worse. So this is what we can find, the latest data published by the government. So what people say? What people say are the consumption, what they expected their consumption relatively compared with relatively last year, also relatively May, relatively March. See what happened. You can see that people told us the average percentage of the job of the consumption compared with last year. In March will be 9.4% here, and in May, the number is much worse. It's negative 17.3%. So seems like people's expectations are getting worse. In May versus March, we know that in May everything almost get back to normal, but seems people are not feel normal. If you look at by income groups, almost all income groups, their substantial job in their they're more, their expected consumption is in May is much worse than in April. So based on this, I don't think the so-called bouncing back, or sometimes people like to say is a revengeful bouncing back in consumption is unlikely to realize, unlikely to happen. So we want to understand what factors affecting, who are they affecting the expectation of the consumption in total consumption. So here is some summary of regression results. We use their expectations of the consumption, expected change in consumption as a Y variable, and then we essentially trying to understand a bunch of other variables to see if those are related. What happens? What kind of factors affecting people's expected change of the consumption? You can see that we did it by several income. You can see that by income groups. First of all, the most important factor is their expected change in income. So that's highly correlated with their expected change in consumption. And then you look at other factors. Obviously, these are positive, means so those income group compared to the worst relatively reference group will be people with annual income, household with annual income less than 30,000. Richer people have a fewer change, have a less job in consumption than poor people. You look at the hukou, relative to the urban hukou, the rural hukou has a little bit positive actually income consumption change relatively to the urban people. So poor people fare slightly better. And you look at but other than that, you can see most of the factors are not significant. You can see there's a little bit significant in terms of those people, people who don't have jobs, but they have government transfers, slightly better, fare slightly better. And most of the factors people are not much of the change. It seems like income is the key variable. So the job income is key variable. We go further to say how the liquidity asset works. So here we further analyze what happened to the expected change in incomes relative to their liquidity asset, because consumption can come from the income, also can come from their liquidity asset. You can see this liquidity asset for the poor seems like played a pretty important role. This is where you control the liquid asset, the income factor drops a little bit. But you can see the liquidity asset. So those people, liquidity assets support less than 6 months. Okay, so we asked them, how your liquid asset can you liquid asset support 6 months of the income, 6 months of your consumption? And for those people answer that, you can say interact with income group, that the poor people seems like fare much worse. And for income group less than 30,000 or income group less than 30, between 30 and 50, the fare worse. So their expected change in consumption become even worse.
So, Professor Gan, just to clarify, in case we are lost here, what is the dependent variable? Could you?
Dependent variable is we ask them what's their expected change of the in consumption compared with last year in 2020.
And it's 1 and 0?
No, it's a percentage.
Oh, I see.
Percentage. So this is a percentage. So I say expect change in consumption. That's the percentage. And the right panel of this PPT is if expected consumption is lower, this is 0, 1. 1 is lower, 0 is not lower, same or higher. Okay, so the previous table is also expected change. So expected change of the income, of the consumption. I'm sorry, expected change compared with last year. And we give them a range. Obviously, they are not going to tell exactly. We give them a range, and we translate the range into a number. There's obviously quite a bit of the measurement error, but that's not yet the concern of this analysis. Okay. The second question is again, the right panel is expected income, expect consumption if is lower or not. So what I says is that if it's lower is 1, it's not lower is 0. Okay. Here I want to mention that this is more or less like a precautionary survey. We ask them that are you expect to save more or less in the future, in 2020, and we see that question. Where that question. I think that I want to mention that all these surveys are conducted by telephone. We cannot go face to face. So because it's conducted by telephone, you cannot ask a lot very detailed questions. What's exactly consumption would be? That's not going to work. And the length of the survey cannot be too long. So there's lots of restraint about what kind of information you can get from the telephone survey rather than the face-to-face. Face-to-face, you can get a lot more detailed information. Telephone survey, you cannot get that detailed information. That's the question. So most of the question we conducted are either in range or in categorical. Okay, that's just to clarify the data set. So you look at the data. So the right panel basically says that for the rich people, like people with income group higher than 100,000, and they actually we find the significance in terms of for example, in terms of those people will say they're more likely their expected consumption is lower. So for richer people, it is saving motives. For the poor people, it is liquidity constraint. Obviously, everything related to the expected change of the income. So that's the message. So that's what I'm saying. I put a quotation mark is because we just ask them, are you going to save more or less? And for the rich, precautionary saving motives, we think contribute to less consumption. For the poor, I think liquidity is, in addition to income, important. So that's what I think the question about the overall picture of the consumption. Almost nothing else matters. Then the question is we see a pretty substantial change. You can here see that in May, the relative to March, the income has been lower than 5 percentage point. Expected change in consumption. Expected change in consumption is a 5% more 5% fewer consumption than in March. People's expected have changed. We want to understand what factors they changed, why they changed, and so we're trying to interact with different categories to find which group of people, which type of people have made changes. And what we find is there are some patterns, but overall, every groups, no matter how you cut it, they all have changed their expectations of this is income, expectations in consumption. Oh, okay. Okay, this is slides changes later. So this slides to say because income is key. we understand why, how people, their income are changed, why their income, obviously their income is lower, and the expected income is lower, and we want to understand why, who are they lower, and by how much. So in May, people actually, on average, compared with March, they think their 2020's income is 5.8% lower than in March. And then but then you look at by income group relatively to the poor, these are positive. So means and also number is large, larger for the higher income group. That means that poor household fared less than the richer household. And you look at the relatively to the urban hukou, rural hukou, and also rural urban migrants fare less than urban hukou. And you look at those people compare with people working in the public sectors, reference group in the public sector, everything except SOE are negative, means everybody else working for different type of employers fare less in terms of the income expectation than the poor, than the public sector. I mean, that's expected. Also, compare with people, no jobs, obviously people with government transfers are not affected much, insignificant, but the people without government transfers, like BIBA, those kind of things, fare worse. And lower education fare worse, higher education fare better, this by education. So those are the changes. Then that's for income. So this is how they changed what kind of things. I mentioned this earlier. I just quickly go over this and say, we try to understand which group have changed their expectations in consumption in May. And I think I said almost every group, no matter how you cut it, almost all of them are significant. So that means every group, everybody, this is universal in China, including state sector employees, et cetera, all thinking a lot worse in May than in March, late February and early March. Okay, then we do ask them in May how their employers, these are employers have, what have they done since the COVID-19, since the pandemic. And you can see that 13% in March, 13% people say their employers have laid out people. And in May, this number becomes 26%. And 8.8% in March said their employers have lowered their salaries or wages. And in May, this number rise to 15%. So things like people have the thing in terms of the employment and in terms of laid out people, seems that more firms have laid out people and more people have lowered the wages, have lowered the salaries, lower wages. So it's getting worse. So I look at their employment status. This is pretty interesting. Look at this. So since we went back to the same household, so we know exactly what they have done in June and August, June-August 2019. And we use the number that called the employment rate. Basically, the denominator is all people during the labor force between 16 and age 65. That's all people. And then we use the numerator is if they have a job, if they work or not. So this is different with unemployment rate. We're not going to calculate unemployment rate, or we're not going to report unemployment rate. So look at the number. Is essentially overall among labor force, 86.8% of people have jobs in June and August 2019. For the COVID-19 sample, which we have surveyed, this one is 87.2%. So there's a slight difference because the sample is not entirely the same. But In May 2020, the same people from 87.2%, their employment has dropped to 75.1%. So there is 12% job in people who have jobs, who are working jobs. That's 12% job. And these are different. For urban hukou, the job is it's only 5%. You can compare 87 versus 82. And for the rural hukou, but work in urban area, but not local, these are more out of town migrants. This job is 6%, and there's a job of 82. Their job for the local migrants, and then there's the biggest job come from the rural. Seems like there are big problems in the rural residents who still live in rural. Okay, they live in rural, and they're not leaving their home, and their jobs, like their 20% job in their, whether you can find jobs, they don't have a job. They used to have jobs at 90%, now they're only 68% of them have jobs, are working. So it's a big job of that. So that's the employment job. All right, so we also talk to the small business owners and see what happens. So these are, previously we talked to the individuals, to the households. So what's going on in their side? And then we talk to another side of the small business owners. And so this is the number between February and April. You can see that this is, we asked them what kind of challenges you face in February and also in April. And you can see that this is not enough orders. In February is like 7%. And in April, this has become a dominating problem facing small business. 75% saying they don't have orders, they have problems with orders. Now, obviously, that relate to the cash flow. And in February, we have problems like logistics, like personnel, right? They don't have enough personnel, it seems like that. And also because of the COVID-19, they cannot have jobs. Those are all gone. So the problem becomes, dominating problems becomes there's not sufficient demand for the firms, for the small business. We don't have information for the big business. So that's one thing. And the same, you look at what's the expectation of how they change, how their people, how the small business, their expectation on the economy. We ask them, are you very optimistic or cautious, optimistic, not sure, pessimistic or very pessimistic? You can see the number. The number essentially, there's rising optimism from February to March, and then there is a rising pessimism from March to April. So April seems like getting worse on the economy. You can see the number goes this way, not sure goes down, so more people are sure. Pessimistic go up, very pessimistic goes up. So that's how I think the expectation on the economy, given the country has gradually getting back to normal, by expectation are getting worse. And then we ask them about how their own business will fare in 2020, what they expect. This is the owners of the small business. And you can see the number tell the similar story. Obviously not sure goes down, substantial loss or bankruptcy or may go bankruptcy goes up, difficult but they can manage goes up, same as last year goes down, and the fast growing have a little bit going this direction, so slightly going up and going down. So essentially the story tells that the small business are not are getting their expectation are become worse and worse, become worse as time goes on. So a brief summary, and given the time, a brief summary, basically, I don't think a bouncing back of consumption will happen, and did not happen, and I don't think will happen in the near future. I think the key reason is lower expected incomes, people aside. There's less liquidity for the poor, also causing the consumption to be lower, and also the evidence for higher precautionary saving motives for the relatively rich. the not employment and the lower wages also contribute to that story. And SME, there is more pessimistic than before. And so the conclusion, obviously, look at the problem has been switched from supply side of logistics and hiring, et cetera, seems like to the demand side, not sufficient orders. And this combined with that the people's income is expected to low, I think a substantial direct cash subsidy program to the relatively poor seems necessary for not only economic, not for the social welfare, for the fairness, whatever, but also for the economic recovery. And I spent a few minutes to mention that I have been trying to promote this quite a bit since February and March. I've given quite a bit of, and the typical question people ask me about this is how to find the low and middle income people. The 4 questions: how much is appropriate? You mentioned that the substantial subsidies, transfers, cash transfers, to be fair and efficient. How to think of the problem, and government official often ask me, will the subsidy cash transfers be saved rather than consumed, and where does the money come from? I spent a little minutes to mention what I've been talking about this. So I think actually it's not true Chinese government don't want to transfer to the people. One big obstacle is they don't have the instrument. Not like US, you have a tax returns, you can directly target to individuals. Chinese government don't have that. So for those people, actually, they do have direct connection. They have done they have done some, not quite a bit, they have done some. So for those DBAO people, lower minimum guarantee people, there are about 14 million in rural and 13 million in urban. In February, actually, the first time in February, they already doubled the part of that is called the price subsidy in February. And then they also have direct connection for those people who file unemployment insurance. They actually lower the threshold of getting unemployment insurance benefit for quite a bit. Used to be you have to be there, enroll for 1 year. Now they enroll less than a year, you can still apply. But many people, they still cannot find them. So that becomes one of the technical problems that the Chinese government can directly transfer money. So what I'm trying to say is people in China know this. This is called a personal tax APP. This APP is pretty revolutionary in such a way of connecting people, connecting individuals with the central government. So right now currently we're doing this essentially. We're doing the income, comprehensive income. You get you have some deductions, you can get money back, etc. But only people making more than 60,000 per year have the incentive to fill. So there's only tens of millions of people fill out. Not many people fill this APP. So I think this can be expanded, and it can be expanded pretty easily. Give a little bit incentive for people to do this. So this is one thing. The second is how much is appropriate and essentially fair and efficient. So this goes back to the detail of the Chinese personal income tax reform in 2018 and 2019. Essentially, for that reform, people making 60,000 per year or more can get 6 types of deductions. So those deductions, but people making less than 60,000 don't have the benefit of the deductions. So what I'm trying to say is you can let them fill out the form and calculate the calculate deduction, and then essentially transfer them at 10% of the deductions. And this is roughly average tax rate. So that's fair. And how much money will cost? By doing that, what type of 61% of the people will be covered, and it will cost 700 billion RMB total deduction. And at per household, average is roughly 2,400 RMB a year. I think that's fair, and the number is also efficient. So finally, I want to say that this is what we have studied, find out what's the marginal propensity to consume that for the poor and for the rich. So you can see that for lowest 20%, 82% of them actually will consume the money they get from the government. And 86% of them will consume all of them. And for the highest 20%, most people, it's not that much, the highest 20%, it's actually only 5% will be consumed. So as long as we get to the poor, relatively poor, and this money will be spent because of the very steep change in marginal propensity of consumption. And we calculate this number, how much will generate consumption directly. 700 billion will generate 500 billion of consumptions. So finally, where the money come from? So I learned that they have the spatial debt, the spatial term debt, which the National Congress passed about a trillion, roughly a trillion, and those cannot be used for this type of subsidies. But there's other ways to do it. I think the money is fungible. Chinese central government debt as a percentage of GDP is very low. Right now, it's only like 40%. It's quite low. I think they have lots of room. There are lots of discussion whether this will be done or not. But I think they should not wait. They cannot wait. They want to wait. They want to wait to see what happens. But I think the numbers say that they cannot wait and they should not wait. So I'm going to stop here, and I have others, but to see any questions. Yeah.
Oh, thanks a lot for the very informative seminar. Unfortunately, I was forced out to the being host, so I lost the questions. So I have some memory of those. So let me try, even though I might miss some of this. So one is this: some people, we are very interested in certain policy consequences. Like if someone asked about the consumption coupon. So how do you think about their effectiveness? What would be a like hypothesis about that against say some typical transfer, cash transfer, for example?
Okay, we have there's some study about the consumption coupon. So academic study of consumption coupon did not speak. I don't think that the results are not that positive. Like previously, Taiwan and Japan have done substantial consumption coupon. They didn't typically about 20%, $1 of consumption coupon, 20% will generate additional consumption. Income transfer, on the other hand, research has been done for the US at least, roughly 60% are generated. The transfer generated consumptions. We don't know this round of the transfers will generate how much of a consumption. We don't know that. But previously, 2001, 2008, those two rounds of the big consumption, big transfer, income transfers, cash transfers, generate 60% of the 60% are transformed into consumption. In China, one of the biggest mentality change for the government official is actually consumption coupon. We had never done this. Anytime we facing crisis or economic downturns, the incentives of government or the first thing come to their mind is to constructions, is infrastructures, is spent on projects rather than giving money to the poor. So this time around, many local governments, at least also at the encouragement of the central government, have spent some money. The calculation is about 220 billion RMB nationwide, except roughly speaking, on consumption coupons. There's some study to say that consumption coupon has a very high rate of stimulating consumption. I'm not convinced by their studies. Some people in Peking University have done this, said $1 of consumption coupon may stimulate $3 of the consumption. I'm not convinced. I don't think that will happen in equilibrium. It may happen in specific environment. People might want to try, or people already want to consume, and there's a little bit, the consumption coupon often serves as a discount of the consumption coupon. The biggest problem with consumption coupon is right now they all have done essentially through like Alipay or WeChat or those platforms. They do not get to the poor. Typically, the money do not get to the poor. The money gets to the relatively more savvy, technically savvy people, young people, to say at least. I'm happy to see consumption coupon, more consumption coupons, but I'm not. I think I think the effect of that is. I'm not convinced the effect is high. It's that effective, but the biggest positive side of that is the change of the mentality, change of the perception. Now we can give money to the people, at least in some form. And that's a very big change in the mindset of the government officials.
I see. Yeah, interesting. So there's another very interesting question. I think you are the expert. So many people are fascinated by this Li Keqiang's comment about the 600 million Chinese.
Yeah.
So what's your think about this?
Another way to organize this type of talk, which we have in some other things, is just look at the 600 million people. And we have done that. So 600 million people, indeed, our data is very similar to what Premier Li have been saying. So those individuals making less than monthly income of 1,300. In China, making 1,300 will amount to 6 million of them. So on average, it's about 1,000. Less than 1,300, about 1,000. So that will be the number. Our number is very similar to what he said number. So we do have a very large sum of the people who are not making that much money, and those people are fared much worse in the pandemic, during the pandemic. And the biggest part of them, the worst part of them, is actually migrant workers. They often are not. Today, I didn't organize the talk along from that perspective. So migrant workers, they actually are not covered. Their shock, their income loss is worse, and they don't have a regular labor contract, and their liquidity is worse. There's lots of problems with them. I think we really should help them in a big way. But again, the government cannot find them. Government cannot find them. They want to help, they don't know how to help them. So that's why I emphasize this personal income APP is quite important. That this time, if you just let this down, and the whole infrastructure will be established, and we can do a lot more things if we have this infrastructure built up.
I see. Yeah, so I'll take the opportunity to ask a question myself. So I'm just curious, the main message you would say that this decline in consumption is mainly driven by some income decline?
By income, yeah, by decline in income, yeah.
But
also by liquidity as well.
Okay.
So for the poor by liquidity. For the rich, there's some evidence of precautionary saving motive. So rich are not everybody's consume less. Everybody's consume less, and everybody's expect to consume less. Everybody's income is affecting less. I said every group expectation become worse, no matter where you are. I don't see much of a distinguishing factors of one certain group are are not. No, every group is like that. But mostly driven by income, but also poor, I think driven by, in addition by the liquidity, and also rich driven by the precautionary, little bit by precautionary saving. Yeah.
And the income effect comes from like their job. Some of them lost their jobs and some of them get lower wages. And do you think this demand, it's for the employers, this demand is mainly driven by the market within China, or a lot affected by the global market?
No, not much. 8% of the firm. I didn't give you data there. So among the employer survey, 8% of the firm said by global, by trade basically. Most of them are not. So trade seems like have not played a very important role in people's mind, at least in both employers' mind or employees' mind. Have not, trade have not, okay.
Okay, I'm reading other people's questions. So one of them is, can you repeat the total number of money the central government has spent on consumption voucher?
20, this is before the latest round of aging government, which we collected is about 20 billion.
Wow.
20 billion nationwide, yeah. There's about more than 100 cities have done that.
I see. And most of these are get by young people, as you said.
Both, we don't know. We don't have data for that, but all of them are distributed by the platform. Many of them by Alipay platform. So you have to have an Alipay, and you have to be savvy in order to get this.
I see.
So I expect those money, those are got by, certainly not necessarily by the very poor. We don't know. We don't have that data, and.
And there's a question like, so the surveys at UCSD find a significant increase in urban citizens' support for the government after February. Do you have any question in your surveys that?
No. We don't ask those questions. We don't ask questions about are you supporting the government or not. I don't think. Those questions probably are not going to. We're probably not being approved. We don't have those type of questions yet.
Another question is, do you think the patterns you find in China would be similar or replicated in the US? Why and why not?
But that's a judgment call, and so I'm not following the data for the US, but from what I'm experienced right now, looking at it, so I mean Texas, even though business are opened, at least half capacity open, I don't see half capacity people going there. So I think I don't see the business. I don't see demand have risen substantially or have getting back to what it was before. So I'm not optimistic from that perspective. But I'm not following the data of the US, yeah.
And so you talked about the rural and so why would rural residents so much affected by unemployment?
So this is not unemployment. This is more they're not working. So there's a couple of reasons. One reason where the number here. So one possible reason is some of the people getting back. So now they are in rural, and they don't have things to do. So this is a question about do they have things, are they working or not? So they're not working. So they go back to the rural resident, the rural residents, where they live is still rural, but they are working, and the number has been dropped quite a bit. So like from 90% to the 68%. this is not this is not unemployment rate. You understand unemployment rate, you need to be, you need to look for jobs if you don't have a job. We're not looking for that. We're not doing that. We're doing this. The denominator is all the population between 16 to 65 in the sample. And then the numerator is, do they have a job or not? So we use this number to gauge the labor market situation. I think it's fine. It's a good number.
So I'm also curious about this difference between this 9,500 versus this 8,500. So the people who chose not to answer the question is not that they got a job somewhere else, so that you miss them, or?
Oh, so this number 95 to 85, right? There's 1,000 people. There's not a perfect match. So some people didn't. There's some non-response, but that's not. I don't think that's ratio. I would say it's they didn't find the perfect match. So
okay,
we need to match the individual. Probably they have my team was unable to have a perfect match of the individuals.
I see.
Yeah, so you want to get back to kind of matching exactly. There may be say something, the age is wrong or something like that, or they may have some additional these additional members, or some members that don't, when they say last year they are in household that no longer lasted in the household. This is probably same people in the same household people. There's slightly difference, yeah. Yeah. There's some differences because of that.
Yeah. So another question is, do you think these decimal numbers may partly driven by time lag? Say bad things happened in February and March, but it wasn't until May that everything sank in, so that this reflect more like backward-looking view rather than forward-looking outlook.
Which I don't quite understand the question. So say it again. Which number they talk about?
Oh, it's the general picture that things are worse in May than in people's evaluation.
The reason we have some other work which have shown, essentially in February and March, people are quite optimistic. If I think on outlook, even though the recovery was not so good, still the country partially locked down or even complete lockdown, but people are optimistic about the future. In May, I think the expectation, even though things are getting back to normal, but I think the getting back to normal not as well as good as what they had expected. So for example, there's another number. So how much you think the economy will recover? In February, March, people say on average say 6 months. Now in May, the average number will be 10 months. People have changed. The people changed, I think, because of the recovery has not been as good as they expected. That's my hypothesis. But trying to verify that hypothesis is rather difficult, which we haven't figured out a nice way how to verify that hypothesis. That would be my guess, yeah.
Also, I'm curious, is your data, can your data speak to lockdown policies, how effective they are, how that affect people's perception and behavior? Is it possible?
Yes, we have people writing papers on the lockdown. This is using earlier data to see how the lockdown affected. Lockdown was very effective. What do you mean lockdown policy? Lockdown was very effective in terms of lots of things. What do you expect?
I'm curious more like this unlocking down, like the end of lockdown, how that affect consumption. Is it helps to boost consumption or not?
No, didn't.
Okay.
The unlockdown didn't help boost the consumption. That is the message here. Didn't boost the consumption. The recovery, for example, their work have been getting back to normal, even not completely normal, but you look at the data. I didn't show the the employment state situation is much better in May than early on. Even though May is not as good as last year, but it's still much better. But then the question, but people did not increase the consumption. We see nothing like that. We didn't see anything.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot for. I ran out of questions from the Q&A window. So, or if there's any other question, you can unmute yourself to ask.
There's somebody asked me about this PBOC's consumer finance survey.
Oh yeah, you have that question. That's great. I was forced out, so I lost the first question. Yeah, please.
I have this question.
Yeah, please.
So, okay. So the PBOC survey, we don't know how the sampling is done, and we don't know how they didn't release those detailed information how they done, so we don't know how they're connected. But PBOC survey you no longer can find online, and it has been taken off by PBOC themselves. So that says quite a bit about, that says something about that. I think they overestimate a lot about Chinese household wealth. What they show that, particularly on housing side, which is I believe is way off. There's too many houses. We are one of the most pessimistic team in the market to see like how the oversupply situation, like the vacancy rate, those kind of things. If you use their data to calculate vacancy, it would be so much higher than what we have calculated. I don't think the aggregate data will support that we know. Yeah, I don't think we'll support that. So I think they overestimate China's household wealth by a lot.
So I got another question. Is say you said the revenge consumption is unlikely to happen. So is it possible that the young urban generation will resume their shopping overseas or internationally? If they reduce their consumption internationally, do you think domestic manufacturers would benefit from that?
What do you mean the reduces? There is another. I'm not sure the question is. There is another piece of the evidence which I'm not showing here is there's a very strong, big jump in people's demand for overseas assets. There's such a sharp decline for that. So people are not across all income groups, and in terms of the overseas assets. So Chinese people now view domestic assets as much safer than international. I'm not sure about your data about the consumption, international consumption. So I don't think if you mention that if the question is about how the consumption will be doing, international consumption. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm not sure what it means. I'm not sure what it means. Yeah.
Sorry, it's also new to me to read other people's question, so I might miss the key point.
As the implication of Chinese consumption for international economy. Oh, okay. Implication of the Chinese consumption. Well, China is not going to be driving engine for international recovery. If that's the question of that, what you mean. So if people say the international, so China will import a lot of things because China seems like recover a little bit earlier than the rest of the world. When they recover a little bit earlier, you want the Chinese consumption to pull, at least to help the other countries' production or export. I don't think that will happen. That's not going to happen. Yeah.
Maybe the last question I think is interesting is that the China's GDP per capita household income is very low compared with per capita GDP. In the US, the number would be 80%. in China, it's 40%. So do you think this would affect the macro responses to your proposal? As a share of GDP, how much would it be the direct income payment?
Very compared to for 26 compared to 6 in US would be. Do you think effective macro response for as a share of your direct income payment would be about how? Oh, so mine is 0.7%. So if give me I'm showing a graph, a pretty dramatic graph, which just later just show this here. This is how much China has given here. This is how much China in terms of the transfers, everything included. Very low. This including Social Security and Medicare and the medical expenditure. So China is 8% social spending. If not including Social Security expenditure, China is 2%. US is 12%. If only cash, China is 4%, 0.4%. US is 3%. So China has spent. If Aaron's question is about China, how much? China has spent very almost nothing on transfers. And what China has spent? This is a number. This is the number China spent on just the railway, highway, and airport. China is so much higher than the rest of the world. So that's the China spending priority, and I think that spending priority needs to. It's been quite successful. I think that needs to be changed, and to be changed in a big way. That we should spend a lot more in direct transfers to the poor. And they are going to spend it, and China's consumption will be up. So my point for last 20 years will be that's the transition to the economy that is almost painless transition to the domestic consumption-driven economy, not depends on trade, and have a long, that's if a barrier. That's the my way said is 0.7%. 0.7%. China, US is the US this time spent 2.9% for direct transfers. US has spent 2.9% of the GDP. China, what I suggest is 0.7% of the GDP. It's way lower in terms of the how much we spend. Okay.
Yeah, sounds great. Sounds in the end, it's a political economy question. Is it more effective? Would the government buy that the multiplier effect will be larger if they directly make transfers to the citizens?
Yeah. I haven't calculated multipliers, right?
Yeah.
I haven't calculated. I didn't even mention the multiplier. I'm just saying generate direct consumption. How much direct consumption based on the marginal propensity to consume? There's no multiplier effect yet. If multiplier effect is a little bit controversial, how much it will be, it depends on what kind of models you use. I didn't even mention that.
Yeah, great. Yeah. That's great. Thanks for the great presentation and for the big picture finding we need to think about, and it certainly calls for policy responses. And thanks. Right. I hope some of your policy suggestions would be taken by the government. Okay, Sam. All right. Am I done?
Yeah, you're done. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks for this.
Thank you. Thanks.
All right.
Great. Thanks for coming to the seminar, and feel free to email Professor Gan.
Yeah.
And check our website of the China Center for future events. Thanks.